Good morning and welcome to CSIS. I'm Jon Alterman, Senior Vice President Brzezinski Chair in Global Security and Geostrategy and the Director of the Middle East Program. It is my pleasure to both welcome you and to welcome Maged Al-Madhaji. Maged is the co-founder of the Sana Center for Strategic Studies, has been a researcher on Yemen, and I think one of the most prominent researchers and thinkers about public policy issues in Yemen. Of course, Yemen has been very much in our minds as Red Sea security is a growing problem for the world, but Yemen continues to suffer under a civil war that has been seething for many years and arguably has been going on for decades. You all have translation ear sets. Maged will speak in Arabic. They should all be set to channel 2 for English. لو تريد أن تسمع بالعربي قناة 10. Okay, so we have translation both ways. Maged is going to speak briefly at the beginning. We will engage in a conversation, and then we will open the floor to questions. If you are here, there is a paper on your seat with a QR code. You can type in questions there. They will magically appear on this iPad up here. If you're watching at home, in the event link, there should be a way to ask questions, and also on the YouTube link if that's what you're watching. So we will first listen to Maged, then Maged and I will have a conversation, and then we'll open it up to discussion. Maged, welcome to Washington. Welcome to CSIS. I have been thinking a lot about Yemen in recent months. What should we be thinking about Yemen?
Thank you very much, Dr. Jon. I'm so glad to be here in Washington, D.C., especially at this timing. It's actually a very critical time, especially that it's an election year in the United States. But everybody keeps on thinking about Yemen and know that it's a major issue, especially now with the events in the Red Sea. Lately, there was a ship that contains 1 million barrels of oil was attacked in the Red Sea. This is among a series of events that have been taking place that the Houthis have been perpetrating in the Red Sea. What does that mean to the world? The world discovered that these people are daring, are bolder than they thought they could be, and the worst war that caused the worst war between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. The war, as the Houthis have lost their popularity in Yemen, and especially as the war took a decade. It's a very poor country. What happened as a result of this? The group became stronger, and everybody expected that they could not get this large. It was a surprise, and it's of course a challenge. On the 7th of October. It's actually what's before 7th of October and what's after is totally different. It's a new chapter. It's a new era. Everybody was getting ready to normalize with Israel, and people also were about to normalize with Houthis in Yemen. But this group now is like doing an unprecedented challenge, representing there are 1 million barrels now that are about to be spilled into the Red Sea. And this is a basic threat to economics, to security, to the environment. Houthis now not only can target oil facilities in the Arabian Peninsula and the Gulf, but all the global trade now is being targeted. And they can just use their weapons to apply any agenda they think is in their favor. And in the axis of resistance, affiliating Iran, the Houthis have proved to be a useful tool, more useful than all the other members of this axis. It's like a winning horse, a bold horse, And of course, they're dangerous, and they have less calculations. They don't have the same calculations of Hezbollah. They have a bigger platform. They have a bigger area, and they could absorb shocks. And there's a big population in the areas where they control. It's a very good location. They have developed their military abilities very well, and the commitments towards the people in their areas are minimal. And actually, they don't practice any responsibility. And they don't give any rights to the citizens in the areas where they live. And sadly, this is going to help the Houthis to be more effective, more harmful in the coming phase. And the international response is weak. It's very sad also that the U.S. doesn't have a specific policy towards Yemen. Either it was like a response. The U.S. policy was about Al-Qaeda, security, or some of the interests between the U.S. and its main ally in the region, which is Saudi Arabia. The lack of a specific U.S. policy is worse than having a bad policy, the lack of policy itself. And continuously dealing with Yemen was always also according the election year requirements in the U.S. There has to be more awareness of diagnosing who are the enemies of the U.S. There's always a margin for the U.S. to benefit from such events. Houthis are acting freely now because there is no U.S. policy, and the U.S. is busy in the election year, so nobody wants escalation in the South Red Sea. So Houthis think they run away without punishment. Of course, this requires our attention, and it will have very bad consequences. And especially for these players who think that they will never be punished for what they do. The political track in Yemen now is in a stalemate. We were hoping that the roadmap by the UN envoy was being marketed. And of course, failure in Yemen, it will have a very bad effects on Yemen, the long term, and the region long term. The behavior of Houthis in the Red Sea made it really drifted the international community from the roadmap that they have been committed to. And sadly, we expect that Houthis will be stronger militarily and politically on the expense of the other Yemeni parties, namely the Yemeni legitimate government. And this is what I wanted to start with, and then we'll have our discussion.
I think for people who don't follow Yemen closely, it's very confusing. There has been a civil war going on since 2014, Saudi intervention in 2015, but for much of the world, they didn't have to care. And then the Houthis began attacking Red Sea shipping after October 7th, and suddenly this has become an issue of global concern. Can you help us understand the relationships between the Yemeni Civil War, the Saudi intervention, Gaza, and Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping? What's the connection between all of them?
The war in Yemen is almost has been going on for 10 years. Houthi and other parties the Houthis came into the capital, occupied the capital. After this track, the Saudis intervened, and it became limited. The political will of the Saudis is just limited to achieving militarily for different reasons. And this led to the roadmap that was put on the table, but I think of it as just some sort of compromise. And everybody wants to get rid of this high cost that the international community is suffering from. So people just want to get rid of the headache called the war in Yemen. And there was a big reward for the winning party. Houthis were about to win. It was going to be a similar thing that happened for Taliban in Afghanistan. And it will not lead to stability. It will be just a military group soul in the scene. The needs of the axis of resistance became higher. The demands became higher of this axis. Houthis are willing to provide more for this axis. They started the drone attacks, and what happened? What did October 7 did? The estimations that said that Houthis were independent from Tehran, but this proved not to be true. Now, actually, on the contrary, the commitment of the Houthis as part of the axis is higher. The Red Sea is just like a main title that reflects a very deep relationship between Sana'a and Tehran. And that any priorities of Tehran and the Iranian interest will be above Yemeni or Sana'a interests. And the investment that the Iranian regime invested in Yemen, returns for the Iranians was much higher of the returns that the Yemenis gained. Well, also very attractive to the people who live in the areas controlled by these axis of resistance militias, even higher than what the mobilization that Hezbollah managed to do. So, like the sectarian borders were broken in the areas where this axis is. The Houthis proved after 6th of October that they have broken this sectarian barriers, and they became more dangerous, and they're dealing with they're working with AlShabab, they're working with different and a lot of dangerous movements in the region. So what the Houthis are doing is like politically is much smarter than the other members of this axis of resistance. And so again, I say October proved that the Houthis are the winning race horse after October 7 in the region.
It sounds from your description like the Houthi theory of victory is that they emerge as the major power brokers in Yemen. But it also seems to me that by threatening global shipping, the Houthis have made their victory unthinkable for many powers in the region, not just the Saudis, but the Egyptians, the Americans, the Europeans. Do you think that the Houthis have made a mistake by raising the profile of their conflict and making it unacceptable for more parties for them to emerge winners?
Political expectations, normal expectations from Houthis are very, very separate from reality. Houthis are not acting as if they won. They just act that it's like there's a match, a major match that and there's a commitment to Houthis allies, and they just played the role according to what they think is necessary for them and their existence. There was a chance for them to win, but the Houthis' vision think that they are even larger than the limits of Yemen. So the deal that only gives them North Yemen is not enough for them. The 7th of October allowed them to define themselves not just as a local group, as a regional player that has regional interests, that can also redraw the map of the strategic alliances in the region. The Houthi behavior before October 7 and his platform, the way he speaks, is quite different. It's the public, the listeners, people who listen to Abdul Malik al-Houthi now are not just the old audience. Now he's presenting himself as the hero who's facing the Western project in the region. He's addressing a much wider audience. Still, the Houthi military strategy is the same, and they want to expand everywhere, and they want to control the strategic resources in the country, controlled by the government. But, like I said, it's now they're looking even further.
You said, as I've heard former U.S. ambassadors to Yemen say, that the United States has very rarely had a policy toward Yemen. Yemen has always been secondary to other policies the U.S. is pursuing in the Middle East. As you pointed out, we have an election. There's an opportunity for the United States to have a policy toward Yemen. I'm especially interested in your view of what the goals of U.S. policy should be. You've described the Houthi vision of victory, concept of victory. What should the American concept of a successful Yemen policy, what does that look like?
The U.S. policy regarding Yemen was always about security, and it's like a threat, and about some damage containment represented by Sunni extremist groups like ISIS. And also the policy was regarding the interests of Abu Dhabi and Riyadh, which are like the regional allies. Omani's also fears and interests were addressed. And because Yemen was not a real threat to international interests like it is now. So now I think the policy has to change. The concept about Yemen conflict has totally changed. The drones are a factor that also now even the shipping rules, shipping maps are changing, and that's why the U.S. has to look deeper, has to know what's going on and evaluate. And what the Houthis are doing is affecting global interests, but not all global interests. It's not like Afghanistan's location in the center of Asia, where Houthis are sitting, is right next to the shipping lines of the world. So you must have a policy that also guarantees the global interests that are represented in the South Red Sea, and Houthis shouldn't be allowed to conquer all the other parties or be the sole party in Yemen. There has to be a U.S. support to the peace track in Yemen, peace process in Yemen, that will not allow only Houthis to be the conqueror and to run the show in Yemen. So, and like the Houthis thought giving themselves or gaining legitimacy is going to give them the control of the Red Sea and all the strategic interests that this region represents. They have ties with China and Russia and contacts. And these countries, many countries have bases in the Horn of Africa. And China has a base there, but they think it's a very important place. China thinks Yemen shipping is important. Russia thinks there's a chance to hurt. The Russians think they can hurt the U.S. in Yemen. There's a lot of talk on how the U.S. adversaries, can hurt them in Yemen, and this should make the U.S. address more in a better way these threats, where the interest of the U.S. global interest and the interest of Yemen should be also considered, not only the regional partners like Saudi and Abu Dhabi.
To what extent does a successful U.S. policy have to address the distribution of power in Yemen, the way Yemeni political interests engage with each other? To what extent does it need to weaken the Houthis as a force? And to what extent does the United States have to encourage what has at least been a stated goal of U.S. policy of improving the Yemeni economy, improving social conditions? I mean, the number of things that Yemen needs for prosperity is very long. Does that have to be a goal of policy? If not, what are the things that are most important the U.S. absolutely needs to achieve?
I think the United States really needs the roadmap that is being discussed right now, and is like a reflection of the international. It reflects the international community, vision to the scene in Yemen. I think this roadmap has to be reconsidered because it only caters for the Houthis, and it's going to give Houthis more strength, and that should not happen. The U.S. should also consider other options like supporting clear political, military, economy to the other parties fighting Houthis. This will rebalance the power in the country. It will give the U.S. also leverage to run and administer the region and the interest in the region. It will make the risks in the South Red Sea area less. And I think, these are the main factors that could be just a quick response. And the track on the long term requires much more interference. That interference that should guarantee a better economy in Yemen, for example. For example, the government, legitimate government, the counterpart of Houthis don't have any income. So Houthis are controlling the economy, and all the restraints on them financially and politically were lifted. The government was trying to interfere in regarding banks, but it has been weakened, and it could not. Those procedures were weakened. And also politically, all those efforts by the government were actually undermined. So the U.S. interference, yes, it should reflect U.S. interests, but it has to be a little bit more rough towards the Houthis. It should be more of a clear policy regarding Yemen, and a clearer diagnosis.
Make sure I understood you correctly. What I heard you say was the United States needs to support efforts to put more pressure on the Houthis, and that's partly economic and partly military. The Emiratis were criticized for enlisting what others said were jihadi groups to fight the Houthis, partly on a sectarian basis. How should the United States think about the military piece? How much the U.S. should do fighting, how much it should support others do fighting, and how it should differentiate between groups that are acceptable to engage with and groups that aren't acceptable to engage with?
So the United States has to be involved directly with the legitimate government. The legitimate government has an official army. So the Presidential Council now represents all the powers in the country. Some of them are Salafists, and we know that this is controversial, and worries, and there are worries in D.C. about this. But these are politicians, legitimate. They are represented in the presidential councils. So the political and the military support from the U.S. can go towards these parties who are partners in the Yemeni. But we're not asking for boots on the ground. We're not asking for U.S. troops to be involved military directly in South Red Sea. And we don't think it's going to be popular in the region. But more strategically and and contain hostilities in the region, and support the other parties, different parties in Yemen, to be unified and give them political support and strategic support to fight Houthis or combat Houthis. Yes, we know that there are like dangerous partners within the Houthi group, and this makes not only Yemenis but different parties worry, because it's a major like a religious issue, especially in Yemen, where it's already a dangerous place. But the extremists can just be like, we should enhance the proper parties, but ignore the dangerous ones.
Is the role of all the international actors, and who do you think the international actors are that should be involved? There's been a UN role, there's been a Saudi role, there's been an Emirati role, there's been a US role, and a UK role. Is that the right group of international actors, and what should that group or some other group be doing that they're not doing right now?
Not only this group, the horizon is wider. It's not only Saudi and UAE or US, UK. No, there are other parties that are playing a major role. There's the Sultanate of Oman, and they are an ally of the Houthis, and they've enabled them. They are a mediator, but they are also an ally, and they played a major role in the growth of Houthis. So Oman is a major player in Yemen. Qatar was a major player in Yemen for a while. And they financed different parties, the Qataris before, and have been interacting in Yemen with different parties. And as you mentioned, the four countries or parties that you mentioned. So any dialogue in Yemen has to involve a wider audience than these parties. Whenever Saudi makes its neighbors in the Arabian Peninsula worry, these countries start financing a single party in Yemen. So Yemen is becoming like a place where everybody is combating his counterparts. It's becoming a battlefield for others. It's like moving sand, and until we deal with it properly, it will remain like that, and it would only enable these dangerous groups like Houthis or ISIS or the extreme Salafists, which also these people, the Salafists, have like ambitions that make many parties worry.
It sounds to me a little bit like the strategy of putting more pressure on the Houthis economically, militarily, is the policy that the Saudis and the Emiratis have been pursuing since 2015. What are they getting wrong?
There was a lot of corruption and corrupt interest in the war in Yemen. And there were a lot of wrong estimations. And that's why this war in Yemen was not popular globally. It was projected that a few of the richest countries in the world are fighting one of the poorest countries, and this is not the actual diagnosis for Yemen. Before October 7th, people also thought that Yemen issue or problem is just a limited threat. Now, what's different now is that the damage is huge. And it's not only a regional threat, it's a global threat. Yemenis and the region are not the only ones suffering, but now it's not only us in Yemen, but it's the globe. there's a lot of there are a lot of political parties waiting for what the Houthis are going to do, what kind of threats attacks they will do in South Red Sea. But Houthi now is not about the South Red Sea only. It's about a political opportunity for Houthis that they want to invest through these pressures and these operations they undertake to gain, and then they can make, lift the pressures or make them less. For example, if somebody burns a copy of Quran in Stockholm, the Houthis will respond and they will start targeting Swedish ships. If somebody insulted Islam in some country, if a politician does that, Houthis will start reacting accordingly. The world now realizes this way Houthis maneuver. And this is the difference before October 7th and the phase after October 7th. The Houthi actually became a major threat in an important city that important area with international interest.
I just have a few more questions. I would encourage members of our audience to use the sheets to send questions using the QR code. If you're watching at home or in your office, please send a question in either on the event page on the CSIS website or in the comments section. Actually, I think in the comments section on the YouTube stream. Maged, how do the Houthis make money?
This is their best skill. The best skill of Houthis is making money and collecting taxes. They get donations of oil and they sell them locally they get it from Iran. Now they have a big business of selling ammunition and weapons from Yemeni territory. Houthis now are one of the major sellers of ammunition in the Horn of Africa to all the renegade movements and militias. Now, Sana'a is like the regional headquarters of selling ammunition and weapons in the region and in the Horn of Africa. Mainly ammunition for machine guns and pistols, because they started producing them locally. We had those factories before, but they started. These weapons and ammunition is being sent to Sudan and other African countries. There's a lot of smuggling companies that work with global networks, and they work into bring drugs and hash. There were other independent players who used to do this kind of business, but now Houthis are running this smuggling network themselves. So they have exceptional skills in gathering money, collecting the money, but they don't provide any services. The UN, for example, provides health services in their areas. Houthis do not provide any services of any kind for the people. So the legitimate government makes very little income. Houthis make around 3 times what the government makes, but they don't have any responsibilities towards the people. The government, the Houthis only pay for their militia members only, and they're running their activities from international resources and Yemeni wealth, and by prolonging this, we're helping Houthi become richer.
Were you surprised that the Saudi-Iranian agreement last March in Beijing didn't have more of an impact on Houthi behavior, on Houthi relations with the Saudis? Was that a surprise to you, or did you not expect it to have any impact?
It has no impact regarding Yemen. It did not change anything regarding Yemen. The only purpose was to protect Saudi from the Houthi attacks, especially from military attacks. So it was only from just damage containment, and it made Saudi stop supporting its allies in the government, and this is what affected the balance. Iran remained to support its ally in Yemen, while Saudi did not. Houthis still send oil, and Iran still sends oil to their allies. They send weapons. So Saudi became neutral in this map, and of course, like you say, it did not restrain Houthis. Houthis are just acting freely, attacking their enemies inside Yemen and outside Yemen. Even the global countries, global shippers like Chinese companies that use the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, it didn't affect any of that.
Let me just, before I go to the questions, and there's some excellent questions here. Thank you for that. Can you describe the impacts of the war on tens of millions of Yemenis? There's been a war in the north for more than 20 years. There's been a war that's ravaged much of the country for almost a decade. What does that mean for Yemen? What does it do for Yemen? How does it affect tens of millions of Yemenis all over the country?
I'll just bring some examples. The major population of Yemen is in the Houthi-controlled areas, and they haven't been receiving salaries for 10 years. And the others who are left in the areas controlled by the government are suffering because Houthis didn't allow the government to export oil. The prices of exporting goods into Yemen, and because of the siege of the war and the complexities of shipping, it made the cost of importing goods into Yemen very high. 90 or more percent of Yemeni needs are imported. So from 3,000, the cost was 3,000 a container. Now it's maybe 7,000. And from 3 to 7 to 15. Now a container that comes from China costs $15,000. And this is all the goods that come from China, including rice, including the wheat that comes from Australia. Yemenis don't have the ability to buy the simplest goods. And sadly, these little goods and basic goods made them very, very expensive. After October 7th, things became now 15,000 for a container. And then after attacking Tel Aviv, everything became more expensive. The cost of shipping into Yemen, after the Houthis targeted Israel, things are rising again. The prices are rising again. It's above like any normal standard. Like all the cost, this is high, and it's above the ability of anyone to bear. Especially now with what's going on in shipping, the businesses in Yemen are stopped because of the war. We're afraid there's going to be, our environmental issues caused by this spill of oil, by the war in Yemen, and so the effect is economic, is environmental. It has disturbed all aspects of life of Yemenis. Yemenin are not on the living by under the level of poverty. It's just much lower. It's like unprecedented.
So I'm going to turn to the questions, and we're not going to get to all of them. I'll tell you now. You've elicited a number of very interesting and I think difficult questions. And one is the World Food Program and other humanitarian groups have had ongoing challenges providing food assistance to Yemenis. What's the path forward to ensure that food can consistently get to those in need? And part of that question, of course, involves the Houthis' insistence on getting payment for taxing food that goes into Houthi-controlled areas.
Houthi doesn't only tax the food or tax the aid. He is redriving the majority of aid into his own followers. So it does not getting to the majority of the people. We have published many reports in Sana Center about the deviation of aid in Yemen. So the aid that was coming to Yemen, even before the reduction of the aid lately, it didn't reach the targeted demographic. But still, we thought that our estimation, so 70 to 80% of the aid that comes to Yemen goes as political rewards to Houthis and their allies. A major part of the shipments of this aid used to go directly to the fighters of Houthis in the battlefield, and this was always a question, because the World Food Program, asked questions, and Houthis sadly, forced their will. Their behavior is it's not a surprise, but the international community didn't really care. They used to just pay the bill, and the international community didn't care where things ended up. Now the debate is different, but it's not enough. People are questioning how Houthis are interfering and how the aid is managed, how it enters the country, but still no barriers drawn, no exact rules set. Houthis have been attacking and in a major organized campaign against employees of the international organizations like GTZ and different organizations. The Houthis targeted them, imprisoned their staff, and closed their offices. Now there are more than 100 prisoners from these organizations. Now, anyone who works in any organization in Houthi-controlled areas cannot do his proper job, and he's unprotected. So he only receives orders of Houthis, and they're forced to apply because he will immediately be accused of being a spy and taken to jail. Houthis, the managers of the UN representative in Yemen, he and other representatives of other organizations in Yemen, the Houthis stood up and chanted their known slogan, and they insulted the members of the organizations, and the UN said nothing, and these international organizations said nothing. So nobody drew a red line for the Houthis on what he can do and what he cannot. Houthis crossed all the red lines.
People do about that?
Well, there has to be yes, the red lines should be set, barriers should be set. When a Houthi just illegally loot the belongings of these organizations, and there are victims, and these people testified, but the Houthis entered their premises, looted everything, stole the documents, and then after compromising all these tools and equipment and documents, they just gave them back, handed them to the UN. For example, the UN or these organizations has to stop some of their operations. They should not meet with the dignified Houthi leaders by meeting with them. Some step has been taken to force Houthis to abide by the rules, in order to make this humanitarian effort succeed. So yes, red lines should be set.
I'm still not sure how one deals with the Houthis when they cross the red lines, because of course they've been crossing red lines on security in the Red Sea. So let me ask you about security in the Red Sea. There are a number of questions about the U.S. military operations attacking launch sites in Yemen. Some say the U.S. should be even more aggressive. How should the U.S. think about the military component of its Yemen strategy? How do Yemenis perceive U.S. and allied military operations in the Red Sea?
I don't think I'm going to give advice to the Department of Defense in the U.S. They know what they have to do. But we all realize that Houthi relations, he is the winner in the military balance in the region and within the U.S. Factor as a party. Houthis are winning. The Houthis were smart and they allowed to present themselves as a hero supporting Palestine, and nobody did anything. The image, was spread and it worked. So the U.S. has been able to take down low-cost drones, but we think that the problem as Yemenis that the response is weak, and the response makes Houthis look stronger, and that he's defying the U.S. So this image of the U.S., he was made a hero, unfortunately.
Ask again. So, what's the solution? ما هو الحل? If the current strategy strengthens the Houthis, if the current strategy of relieving civilian suffering to the Houthis strengthens the Houthis because they either tax or steal the assistance, nobody wants these things to happen. What does the United States and its allies do differently to get different outcomes?
الاستثمار في خصوم الحوثيين عليه.
They have to invest in the other party countering Houthis. Don't get involved militarily and directly. It's not popular in Yemen to see the U.S., but make Houthis enemies stronger. Support them.
Ideas about how the United States and its allies can increase economic pressure on the Houthis without endangering vulnerable Yemenis who live under Houthi control.
بالتأكيد يجب على
You have to trace the warlords that are making these gains. They have companies in different places. There's a network of very wealthy businessmen who are part of the Houthi, and the Houthis are laundering their money through these networks and through these people. So there have to be sanctions that attack and target these people. And yes, like you mentioned, we don't want to harm the poor Yemenis. But that's why we have to go after the Houthi wealthy business partners, not the poor Yemenis. And we have, and this will be a very good pressure as an economic pressure against the major companies that Houthi own and Houthis. So this will make Houthis weaker, make them less capable of investing and mobilizing their assets, because their money goes through Dubai, Oman, South Saudi. They have big investments in China and different places. They have also agents, economic agents in different places. And there are Yemeni business people in Yemen and outside Yemen are doing the business for Houthis. So I think the Treasury here in the U.S. has to sanction these people. So continue the political pressure. I repeat, differentiating is important between the new billionaires of Houthi movement and the poor Yemenis, and this requires more investigation and tracing and tracking the source on business of these Houthi-affiliated business people.
In a related topic, somebody notes that you said the Houthis are working with AlShabab. What does working with AlShabab mean? Does it share money, arms, bases, members, messaging, ideas, WhatsApp groups? I mean, when you say they're working, what does that really mean?
There is coordination. One of the Houthi leaders, who is now just appointed vice minister of foreign affairs, he led these negotiations between Houthis and Shabab. There's different information that this person had met before with Al-Shabaab. The pirates from Somalia and Al-Shabaab have redrawn their map of interests in the Gulf of Aden, and when they started the piracy long ago, last decade, that's why more bases came to the area, to the Gulf of Aden, to the Horn of Africa. Many countries brought their troops. Now Houthis are doing a similar thing that the pirates did, which is threatening shipping in the southern part of the Red Sea. So on both banks, you find the Houthis on one bank and Al-Shabaab on the other bank. So if the more coordination between these two danger parties escalates, it will be also a very, very dangerous coordination with very high stakes and costs. Houthis have managed. There's ISIS in Kassala and Sudan, Portland in the Somali port. There's ISIS also there. In the South Red Sea, there is a marginalization for a lot of people, and that's why the angry groups, dangerous groups, find it a place for them to grow.
What do you think Houthi escalation would look like? Do you think it's possible that the Houthis will once again attack Saudi Arabia? Will they once again attack the United Arab Emirates? And on the other side, if we do get to a ceasefire in Gaza, will that have any impact on Houthi military operations in the Red Sea, in your judgment?
أولا الحوثي لم يستنفذ.
Houthi still has different options in the Red Sea. If I can describe it, he's acting, he's asking in a safe way for him, that he targets ships, civil targets, but it's not. He hasn't escalated to get the Americans to respond strongly. Houthis can send more missiles, but he hasn't done that yet. He has capabilities. The sea mines that he has, he can spread them much more, but he has not. He controls a group of a number of islands in the Red Sea, so he can do much damage and much harm from the areas he controls and the islands he controls. So he has also unmanned submarines. He has sea mines. He has strategic missiles that he hasn't used a lot because he knows this can harm the troops in that region. These are dangerous files that I think the Houthis can escalate through. Houthis have military capabilities to harm also the facilities of oil in Saudi Arabia or other interests in Emirates. He has all the means to harm these interests, because over the past years he has enlarged his arsenal. In case there's a peace agreement in Gaza, I think Houthi will stop. So it will be a proof of his message that what he declared, that he did it for Gaza. So if there's peace in Gaza, but still, will he still continue by doing these actions and operations in the Red Sea? We don't think he's going to stop in the Red Sea if he feels any threat, or any of these members of the axis of resistance was threatened. Houthi will always resort to these operations and adventures to renew his popularity and increase his popularity. He will just use a cheap, low-cost drone and target a ship for media for any reason.
Is there a special focus on oil tankers, or is it any target that they can require?
واضح.
The political return and the interest and the media coverage they get was through these oil tankers. So after the Greek ship that's about to drown, they targeted two other ships. Then the Sitcom also announced that there was a Saudi tanker and another one that has the flag of Panama. So immediately after the coverage and the attention they got, so now it's obviously a military priority for Houthis to target oil tanks. And so now they learned the trick that you can harm and like twist the arm of the international community. But how do they set the targets? Is it the Houthi, or is it the interests of Iran and the axis of resistance are giving him these main priorities?
Let me ask a slightly unfair question. In 2018, the Emiratis were threatening to attack the Houthis in Hodeidah, and the Americans leaned on the Emiratis and said, do not do that. And they reached the Stockholm Agreement, and we have sort of been in a stalemate since. In your judgment, was that a mistake of U.S. policy to not have a major military operation that would deal a military blow to the Houthis? Or do you think we would be in a difficult situation as we are now, either way?
Yes, it was a big mistake, I believe. Yes, there would have been a cost, definitely, and there will always be a humanitarian cost in any military action. But the map would have changed. If the government troops had won, it would have changed the whole balance, the whole military scene, and we could have avoided a lot of what we're witnessing right now. And it would have not allowed Houthis to be as strong and as effective and as harmful as they are now. We could have achieved more politically after that. Yes, in 2018, the U.S. and the international community actually committed this mistake that you mentioned. There would have been a cost for a few months, but now the cost is like 7 years more.
I haven't run out of questions, but we have run out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming, for honoring us, for having such a thoughtful and wide-ranging discussion. I want to thank the audience here, the audience on the internet. We certainly hope to continue conversations about Yemen, and hopefully we will get to the point where you feel there is a U.S. policy on Yemen, and it's leading toward a better life for Yemenis and Americans alike. Thank you very much.
شكرا دكتور جون.
شكرا.
شكرا لك. شكرا.